Welcome to UserAndI, the channel where I explore all things UX and UI design. And today we're in Adobe XD exploring shapes. So the way this is going to work is we're going to run through simple shapes. We're going to run through joining, subtracting, collection of shapes, and then we're going to run through our special triangle just because it has a few more options than the regular shapes. So first of all, we have our shapes over here. We've got our rectangle, we've got our ellipse, polygon, and the line tool. We won't be covering the line tool today. We're just going to use the other shapes for now. So once we select our rectangle, we're faced with a few options. We've got these here, which basically allows us to round the corners as we drag it in. This option here also affects these options down here. So if we highlighted there and went up and down using the keyboard, we can do exactly the same thing. We also have our rotation options if we hover over a corner, and of course we don't get the rounded edges option for the ellipse just because it's fully rounded, of course. What we also have on our rectangle is that we've got this button here which allows us to change the corners independently. So if we didn't want to change all of them at one time, we can just go here and affect each one, which is also pretty cool. And that's it for the basic shapes. And for the triangle, what we have here, well, I call it a triangle, but that's it in its most basic form. It's actually the polygon shape as we saw earlier when we hovered over it. And yes, we get the option to round the edges as well, but we also get an option to increase the amount of points we have. And then lastly, we have this option just down here. So if we drag that in, that allows us to pretty much change the points of our straight edges, or what would be straight edges. And as you can see, as I drag that in and out, it affects this option down here. So that can be done quite manually as well. If we select that and then we just move up and down holding shift, that will bump us up in increments of 10. That's a general shortcut as well for Adobe XD. And again, if we hover over one of the points, we can easily rotate that. And as we can see, that affects this option just over here. So that's it for our generic shapes and our basic editing of the shapes. Now we're going to move on to being a bit more creative with these shapes. So we have a rectangle and we have a circle. Now they're currently overlapping, and once I drag over them and select them both, we get these options that are available to us. So the first one we can see is add, subtract, intersect, and exclude overlap. And add pretty much does what it says on the tin. It adds the two shapes together and our group changes to union 1. But this is really handy because we still get access to our individual shapes. So we can move this rectangle down, we can also change the border radius, and they will nicely change the individual shape. But once we click out, they're still part of a union, which is pretty cool. So let's explore the next one, subtract. Again, we get a group. If we click into that, we get to move our subtraction around, which is pretty cool. And the edge you'll actually see is, you'll basically see the shape that isn't being overlapped. Does that make sense? You'll see the shape underneath. So the shape that's above it, in this case, those circles were above this shape, and that would be the overlap. But what you can't do is change what's visible or what's not visible whilst you have a subtraction group. You'd have to make a new one. But let's say you've got a subtraction group and you wanted the square to overlap the circle. You couldn't drag that up and down. It doesn't let you do that. You'd have to create a completely new subtraction group. So that's something to note here as well. So if we select this shape here and then we choose intersect, again, we get our group. Once we click into that, we can pretty much move our shapes around. And finally, we have exclude overlap. Again, we have our group and we can move things around in there. Now this is the beginning of making some really cool designs. Maybe even looking at this could be a really cool pattern if we scaled it down and repeated it. This could make a really cool pattern if we joined it with something else. We really start to see really interesting shapes taking form, so feel free to have a look at these on your next design. Let me know how you get on. leave me a comment, and I'll catch you on the next episode.